Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. Now, as you can see from that little new intro that I have, yes, I'm technically considering myself not necessarily a social democrat anymore. Now, nothing really changed that much in between like then and now. Really, all it is just more of a, not a rebrand, but more like it's hard for me to explain it. Like, just basically me accepting, like, yeah, this is a problem. This is because honestly, I've mentioned this many times before. Basically, social democracy, democratic socialism, they're technically kind of the same thing, especially in the United States of America. So really, there's not much to really distinguish the two that are really that big or like, big controversially. So honestly, it really is just a matter of, I guess, personal preference. Though to be fair, if someone still called me a social democrat, I wouldn't be like, I'd be like, not really. It doesn't really matter, honestly. I even at one point thought of like making that intro say like leftist, reformist, progressive, not social democrat, independent. But basically like the idea is like they're both pretty much the same thing. But again, it really is just a matter of preference because, I mean, you know, technically, like, a social democrat should sort of be like, I'm kind of capitalist, but I'm also kind of, like, especially because, like, again, there are a lot of people who do consider themselves social democrats that are very well known for othering themselves from left-wingers, especially the ones who, like, for example, Tony Blair would consider himself a social democrat, and I don't consider myself aligned with Tony Blair. It really is just a matter of personal identification. Like, people who identify as, like, bi versus pan, etc. I'll only really get offended if I technically don't agree with that thing. Like, for example, if someone called me a communist, I'd be like, I mean, no, not really. But if someone called me like a socialist or a democratic socialist or social democrat, it wouldn't really matter to me. But anyways, now that we have that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, we're going to talk about the census, the thing in the news that nobody cares about. The U.S. Census, except it is being somewhat relevant. The census has actually changed how our congressional seats go. You see, the way how the census works is that each different, like, as the population changes, you know, they shift how our 435 members of Congress are delegated, even though technically they should also be counting how many delegates we have, period. I mean, I guarantee you that population has grown a bit over the course of this time, so I would imagine that it would, at this point, need to be raised, but that's not one of the reforms that they're going to talk about. What has happened is that they have basically changed up how certain seats are, and here are the changes. California 53, Illinois 18, Michigan 14, Montana at large, New York 27, Ohio 16, Pennsylvania 18, and West Virginia 13 are gone. Those seats do not exist anymore because those states have suffered certain population shifts. West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, Michigan, Illinois, and California, of course, have had down counts in population. The exception is Montana. His district was eliminated, so they could make room for two because the population has increased in that state so much that now they need two districts again. Montana 1 and 2. Other states that are getting a new district are Colorado getting an 8th district, Florida with a 28th, North Carolina with a 14th, Oregon with a 6th, and Texas with a 37th and 38th. Well, we don't really know at this point how the makeup is, so we're going to have to figure that out later. The first couple of stories we're going to talk about are stories that I haven't talked about, like new stories. The first one is actually one that I probably should have talked about already, but I haven't. The Andrew Brown situation. Andrew Brown is an individual who has been tragically shot in my home state of North Carolina. The situation, as far as I know, is that apparently he was shot in his own driveway, or at least in his general area, like of his residence. Well, the body cam footage will not be released, at least immediately. They will be instead giving it to his family, who will then have to relay what the information is, and then pretty soon, at one point we might get it, maybe not. Though, this brings up an interesting bill that happened previously. This bill was basically to make it so that body cam footage was not considered public knowledge, meaning that they don't need to release it. It's not important to release body cam footage, especially given the situation. And the supposed progressive candidate in the race, Erica Smith, voted to make that bill law. Jeff Jackson did not vote for it. He was one of the people who said, no, body cam footage needs to be released to the public. Interesting. Hashtag Erica Smith stinks. Anyways, there's not much as I can say on this because I'm not following it too much because, unfortunately I'm not. There's an individual who is talking about it a lot, Andrea from Pogs with Bernie, or Above It All, whatever you know her by, her Twitter handle or her YouTube show, whatever. But now onto something a little more lighthearted. Ted Williams, the ex-homeless man with a golden voice, I'm running for governor. A once homeless Ohio man whose smooth radio voice made him an internet sensation a decade ago says that he's running for governor as a Democrat. Ted Williams was propelled into the spotlight in 2011 after he appeared in a video by the Columbus Dispatch panhandling on a highway ramp with a sign advertising his golden voice. The video's millions of views led to national television appearances and earned Williams numerous voiceover jobs. Now, I don't know his platform. I don't know anything about him aside from his story that he's given to the media because of his notoriety. But basically, for those who don't remember, he was a guy who was he was a homeless man and he had a golden voice. He had a voice that was ready for radio, and people would give him money and he'd tell them, he'd say things they basically hey, say talk like you're on a radio station, and he'd be like, you're listening to blah 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 W85, call in this number soon. He would say stuff like that for money. And then one news reporter, he found him, he recorded that video, posted it on the internet, and people loved him so much, and he got so famous overnight that he was able to propel himself back into an actual gig, a job. And it's a heartwarming story, honestly. To be fair, it is. Homeless guy picking himself up by his, not even him. He didn't do it by himself. He of course has the talented voice that everyone loves, but it was also other people who helped him out to get him to that position. And it's a good story, and I'm interested to see where this guy goes, especially if I find out that his platform is pretty good. Let's see if that's the case. Anyways, now let's move on to the next story. Israel, the thing that nobody ever has any controversial thoughts about. The Human Rights Watch has officially used the word apartheid to describe the Israelis' treatment of the Palestinian people. In a 213-page report from the Human Rights Report, they, quote, say, Israel is committing crimes against the humanity of apartheid and persecution against the Palestinians. They went on to say, those who strive for Israeli-Palestinian peace, whether a one- and two-state solution or a confederation, should in the meantime recognize this reality for what it is and bring to bear the sorts of human rights tools needed to end it. Good. Yes. They deserve to be called out. They deserve punishment for what they've done, for what they're doing to Palestinian people. This is something that needs to be looked into and talked about. And think about it, I'm doing that. And I was doing it before a lot of other people. Not really, no. I guess maybe a lot of major places, but obviously there have been people talking about this issue longer than me. The Palestinians, for one. I'm at the forefront of my own issues that I talk about. But not in this one. I'm just another cog in the Palestinian machine. Okay, now let's move on to stories that have talked about previously, but are finally getting some, finishers. First, the California gubernatorial recall. We all know it's in the news, but here's the thing. Now it's officially happening. California's officially getting its second recall, and I'm still mixed on what we do about it. Yes, I know the recall's kind of BS, but do we use this opportunity to try and get someone who is better than Newsom in office? Much like how in the last one, it's get rid of Gray Davis and instead replace him with a Peter Cameo? Well, I don't know. We'll have to find out. We'll let the California progressives find out. If there's a good candidate in the race, I might consider endorsing one of them, or even talking to one of them. But honestly, I don't know if there's going to be anybody really interested. Especially considering even, the lefties in, California see, this is BS. Alright, now let's move on to the next story. Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, he's in deeper trouble than he already was. Matt Gaetz has actually Like, he has a friend named Joel Greenberg who literally stated point blank, yeah, me and Gates did this. We both did what has been said. And that him and Gates were looking for a presidential pardon. Now, a lot of people are using this situation to just do a lot of things. One of the, again, a very egregious one is that they're trying to repaint Al Franken. Like, see, Al Franken's a saint, blah, blah, blah. Al Franken resigned for nothing. And it's like, come on, man, stop. Don't rehabilitate other sex criminals. Franken resigned, so should Gates, so should Cawthorn, so should Cuomo, all of them. Katie Hill's the only one where it's like, yeah, that was BS. But here's the thing, can't change the past. It's not like Franken can be like, me come back now. No, that's not how it works. He's resigned. Game over. You guys hate Tina Smith that much? You guys really hate Tina Smith? The only thing you're doing is rehabilitating people who are rapists. That's what you're doing. You're trying to rehabilitate your specific favorite rapist. That's what you're trying to do. No. And that's why I said the Me Too movement was pretty much dead after the 2020 election. When you take such a big, high-profile sex scandal and then just go, nope, just because it's mine, then it doesn't count. When you do that, you immediately ruin the credibility of it. And it stinks, like I said. It's terrible. And I'm glad that it hasn't really 100% gone away. Even though, again, liberals and Dems will try and to protect their favorite guys. Even though Democrats have historically also made up a bunch of BS allegations against people they don't like Keith Ellison and Ellen Grayson. But, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them. The ones of the people that I don't like are real. The ones of the people I do like are fake. No matter what. No need for nuance. No need for looking into it. It's just how it is. Now, speaking of sexual assault, that's actually an interesting transition. We're going to talk about Mexico again. Mexico's gubernatorial races. For those who don't know, Mexico has been, specifically Morena, has been having a lot of trouble with two gubernatorial races. One in Guerrero and one in Michoacan. And I'll have to explain both states individually. First, Michoacan. Basically, the candidate that Morena wanted to run, Raul Moron, filed certain paperworks for financial statements a little bit after the due date for those statements, and due to that, the INE, Mexico's Election Institute, decided that he was not eligible to participate in the election because he did not file his paperwork for that time period. And Morena and the INE have been in a bit of controversy, fighting with each other. Morena saying that he was unjustly removed, and INE saying it was pretty justifiable, man, come on. Now we pause and then go to Guerrero. Guerrero, their situation was a whole lot more media savvy and egregious. Because here's what happened. Morena's candidate there, Felix Salago Maciendo, was accused of sexual assault by many women. They looked into his situation after it made national headlines, and people like AMLO were saying hey, I don't buy it. This is a neo-lib, trying to smear progressive guy, which rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And basically, the leader of Morena, Mario Delgado, and a couple of other people in Morena decided that it was in the party's best interest for them to basically cancel Felix's candidacy and then make a new, process to choose another candidate. The problem was, for some reason, they allowed Felix to participate in that as well, basically giving him as an option, do you guys like Felix? And unsurprisingly, despite all the allegations, Felix was still really popular in the state, so they ran him again. And they brought him back on as the candidate. However, there was a problem with that. You see, since Felix was brought back on the candidacy, the INE basically said, okay, Felix, can you give us your financial statements for the time period that you were kicked off of the ballot and then brought back on the ballot? And he said, no, because we weren't doing campaigning at that particular time period because I was kicked off of the candidacy. My candidacy was over. They were like, yeah, but you were technically campaigning. You were campaigning for that spot again. So you still should have been giving us campaign financial reports. So you're kicked off the ballot. So those two races did not have a Morena candidate on the ballot. But now, Morena has nominated new people to be on the ballot. In Guerrero, they've nominated Evelyn Salago, Felix's daughter. Meanwhile, Michoacan, Alfredo Ramirez Bedolla, an individual who has been relatively popular in the state, he has been chosen to be their candidate. And with that, I think that these problems are officially going to be over. I'm actually surprised that they allowed, I'm not even sure, I don't know. Maybe Evelyn might get kicked off the ballot because Morena might have technically wasted their time period with trying to get Felix back on the ballot. Because what I originally thought was that since they tried to appeal Raul first before they decided to hold a new nomination process, so that's why Alfredo gets on the ballot. But I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case for Evelyn. I'm not entirely sure. But as far as I'm concerned, it appears that what the controversies surrounding these two states are officially over, and every candidate will be on the ballot, and they'll all move forward as planned. At the very least, I think the Michoacan one is officially done. Guerrero, there might still be some fighting to do, and I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to agree with what they're doing. Evelyn might be a way better candidate than Felix. I don't know if she sexually assaulted a bunch of girls too. I would assume not. But it does seem like a huge pandering to both people. Oh, we got a woman. Oh, we got Felix's daughter. Yeah, at this point, it's eh. But anyways, now let's move on to the main topic of this video. This is one that is going to be one of those, thinky episodes. Yeah, that's one way to describe it. It's a thinky episode. But basically, this stuff, I wanted to get so right that I actually have basically written points down that I want to talk about. Other ones, I don't necessarily go as 100% on, a script, as you can tell. But some I do because it's some information I need more out there. And this topic in particular, I was I do kind of need to write these stuff down, especially considering I want to kind of frame it in a somewhat concise way. Because I'll be honest, even in other episodes, it's it's not concise, really. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because it's literally just there are some people, when they talk about this, they, like a lot of things, unfortunately, on the internet, there are people who literally just don't know what they're talking about. And that is 100% what is the biggest issue with a lot of problems. Everything that I talk about that, is a major issue, it always comes from the fact that people have no clue what they're talking about. And let's get into it. Censorship, the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. Now, as the internet has, of course, become a major part of our lives and political discourse and blah, 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 naturally debates are going to come from, how much, what's censorship? How do we do all this? What's censorship? Should we censor certain things? Should we let everybody talk and blah, blah, blah? It's going to naturally become part of a debate. Now, while this is always a issue, obviously, these issues don't just come out of nowhere. These kinds of issues have existed long before even computers have existed. What is overreach? Is it just government or what else? But as this has kind of been pushed a lot more into the limelight, given things like Trump's Twitter ban, the January 6th insurrection, and how they're reacting to that, as well as previous instances many people being taken off of social media platforms, like Alex Jones or Steven Crowder, even though that was a smaller one, and Stefan Molyneux, Nick Fuentes, and quite a few other individuals. Not all of them are right-wing, some of them are left-wing. That's a thing that happens sometimes. It's not completely 100% partisan. And of course, things like algorithms on our system, on social media platforms do regulate certain things. Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, stated point blank in a forum that she was at that they recommend sources that are mainstream sources effectively because they're the sources that can be trusted. Meanwhile, sources that are not mainstream sources are not recommended as much. For example, you're not going to see a TYT or Kyle Kalinske or Jimmy Dore video, of course, recommended to you because that's not the ones they want to talk about. Because those platforms have been used to spread things like conspiracy theories. Now, before you say I'm accusing any of the individuals that I just stated for spreading conspiracy theories, I didn't say that. I said that these kinds of platforms, people who are unchecked are the ones who do it. While the idea of a person making like YouTube videos in their bedroom, educating you, is good, how do you really know that they know what they're talking about? For example, me. I could have been making up everything that I've stated on this show. Every news story, every main series video, everything. I could have made all that up. But you don't know. Do you? Because that's not, as much as I try to do it, that's not my duty. I could have just been lying to you the whole time to just make a quick buck. A supposed mainstream source should have like fact checkers and such. But of course, we all know that that's not necessarily going to be the case. And for good or for worse, these issues have been brought up to a lot of individuals, especially people in this same sphere. However, being the internet, these debates have not really been living up to expectations, to say the very least. Now, I'm going to try to do the best I can to basically cut through the BS of everybody and basically try to give a somewhat reasonable, nuanced argument, because even though a lot of people don't want to hear that, it is a nuanced argument. First, we need to talk about the broad sides, and you can't give them a name because giving them a name sort of makes them seem like things that they are not. For example, one side sort of is, I guess you could call, like, in the most vague term I can give, considered the pro-censorship side. Like I said, it's a bit more of an, like, over-exaggeration. The individuals in this field will probably be people more like in the TYT or Sam Cedar-like crowd. People that are not necessarily more establishment, or some of them might be, but basically people who are a bit more conciliatory, people who come off not as like the radical ones that they claim to be, but even that's not entirely the case. You know, people like Vaush, who's a lot more radical than a lot of other people, does sort of fit in the same crowd. The other side is considered the anti-censorship side, but unlike the other side, this one is sort of a lot more true in a sense, and you'll see what I mean when I actually get into some of their arguments. But I'm thinking that there are some people who are legitimately like thinking, yes, that is me, I'm the anti-censorship side. They should not really wear that with a badge of pride. Now let's start off with one of the biggest pieces of contention. Censorship. What is censorship? I gave the point-blank definition of censorship at the beginning. Suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered politically obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to society. Suppression or prohibition. Banning or suppressing these ideas. Now that definition is actually, of course the thing about this definition is that it's as vague, and who does those suppressions? People in power. And while most people might think, oh, when we think people in power, we think of like government officials, well, that's not necessarily true, because like if I started a club of people and then I told one person in the club, you can't say this, no matter what, that would be censorship. I'm censoring that person. They even go so far as to say, like, being banned off of social media is not censorship, which goes antithesis to another thing that they view, deplatforming, because deplatforming, technically you could say being banned off of social media is not censorship, but when you get kicked off of a large social media platform, you can't use that platform anymore. You basically kneecap them. Like, for example, Stefan Molyneux, he was banned off of YouTube, and he's basically disappeared because people have no clue where to find him. Alex Jones was kicked off of YouTube, and while he's managed to stay afloat, he has reached a substantially smaller crowd, similar to Nick Fuentes. Like, you would obviously say, like, maybe Fuentes, like, the reason, because he's more tech savvy, he's able to understand how things work, while older people don't know, so they're, of course, going to be, that would consider censorship. But the point being, like, even though while you might say it's technically not, it sort of is, which also makes the argument of, like, many people say, like, oh, just make a new YouTube account, just make a new Twitter account, but you're not allowed to. Alex Jones, if he makes a new Twitter account, he's probably going to get banned in an instant. He is not allowed to use that social media platform effectively cutting off of his audience, which might be a good thing, might be a bad thing, depending on how it's used, and we'll get to that at one point. But let's move on to a similar argument they make. Well, I don't even know if it's a similar argument, but it's a argument that I hear a lot of them use. I don't know if it's like usually done in a sort of, it's used in a sometimes, usually debating right-wingers. They say like, it's a private company, they can do what they want, which works for right-wingers, but you're a leftist. You're not supposed to use that argument. You can only use that argument in a debate where conservatives complain about the censorship in, like, media. But even then, you shouldn't use that one because you can just use arguments like, oh, that's just BS. Especially considering, like, think about this. You wouldn't say that for a gay wedding cake, no? Like, you wouldn't say that, right? Weren't we, like, 3 years ago saying, like, oh, you just bake the damn cake? That was what we were saying, all collectively saying. Who cares if you're a private business? There's some things you can't do. Like, you can't discriminate on people. That's one of the things. You shouldn't discriminate against people. On a principled level, you should be okay with certain people speaking. Well, of course, we believe in freedom of speech. Of course, that's always the argument about freedom of speech. There's always so far it goes. One of the common arguments people use for freedom of speech is the right for you to swing your arms randomly ends where my face begins, which is a thing we always hear, like, people like Kyle Kalinske try to say to sort of like stay in a sort of middle-ish ground. Like, oh, well, I mean, if they're directly doing like harassment and stuff, then that's fine, ban them. But then that also doesn't address a problem that these people would bring up, like the pro-censorship crowd. Like, it doesn't bring up one point that they say, what if they're using their platform for a bad thing? Like, you know, Nick Fuentes, what if he says, like, hey, let's go storm AOC's house? Well, of course, that's a little different. That's a direct incitement of violence, obviously. But, like, you know, like Donald Trump, that's what they said. With him, he was saying, like, we need to storm the Capitol, pretty much. So, what do you do with that? Especially considering he's the highest man in the office. What do you do with that? Do you just fact-check the people? But even then, you can't do that either, because for many reasons. One, people will receive it as a perceived bias, and the other is a future argument that will be made from, like, the other side. Speaking of the other side, we should talk about them, because their framing of this has been the worst. I'm just gonna come out and say it. The other side, the dumb left types, here's how they frame the argument. Censorship or no censorship. Literally, that is how they frame this argument. And, like, literally, don't take my word for it. I'm going to give you an example. Frank Analysis. Frank Analysis is, like, a sort of smaller left-wing person in this little, like freaking, like, dumb left sphere. He said, this is a quote that he said, Mike Figueredo got mad that I made a video about his advocacy for censorship and how it can hurt the left. I would like to at least help him and his audience hear and understand why we are against any kind of censorship. And they conflate every single offense that is made by a person banned from social media as the same thing. Banning people off of social media for saying, hey, I don't believe that the United States should be going into war with China is the same thing as saying, I believe China created the COVID-19 pandemic in order to make the Jews rule the world. Like, it's the same thing to them. And this complete black and white framing of this is the dumbest thing ever. It goes to the point where people will just flat out lie about things. A common example is Nico House. Nico House, he was like trying to get like people to join his side about like this particular issue by saying that Congress introduced a bill basically to label all MAGA rallies domestic terrorism, and it's going to be used to hurt the left at some point in the future. Despite the fact that is absolutely not the case, it was a bill specifically titled the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act and was specifically going to be used to tackle white supremacist hate groups that have been on the rise. A common thing that people will do is they'll literally say like things like, oh, you support Patriot Act 2.0. I've literally gotten in arguments with people for saying that just because they don't support the insurrectionists, and I believe that the government should look into the insurrectionists who tried to storm the United States Capitol and try to kill members of Congress, and before you say, that they did 100%, it is 100% obvious that that's what they're going to do, because what else were they going to do? They're going to walk into the Capitol and then leave and then do nothing? There is 100% an alternate scenario in this if the alternate dimension reality thing is a thing. If that's a thing, there is an alternate dimension where a member of Congress just so happened to be walking down the thing, and then they just kill them. They were either be killed or beaten or anything. That's what would have happened. If you don't think otherwise, you're an idiot. What else were they going to do? If they were going to just do a protest, they would have done it outside. It should have snapped into people's head in an instant. The second that they were starting to break the windows, oh, these guys aren't just here for protests. But they don't want to know that. They don't want nuance. They don't want a debate. They want a black and white situation where they can paint you as the bad guy and them as the good guy. Because you're the bad man who is for censorship, and they are the good person who is against censorship. To which you can easily get them in a trap. Point blank, if you get into a debate with any of these people, I want you to ask them this question word for word. This question, word for word, will kill any argument that they have. You can easily point at them and laugh at them, or you will catch them in a big trap that can easily be used against them in the future. If they were like, oh, we're against censorships of all kinds, tell them, so you're okay with Twitter accounts being used to show child pornography? That question is going to kill their argument no matter their response. If they say yes, they're for censorship. If they say no, they're for child pornography. If they try to roll over this argument, you can point them out at their fact they're dodging a question because their stupid black and white view does not understand the complexities of the real world. Twitter accounts get banned all the time for being child groomers, for showing these kinds of things. Twitter has taken these accounts down and have taken them very seriously. Or if you don't want to use those words in particular, you can say like a white supremacist group or like an ISIS group if they are in that crowd. Because Twitter accounts have been taken down for doing just this. They take these concerns very seriously. And of course they should take these concerns very seriously. They don't want their platforms to be used to do certain things. They don't want their platforms to be used to distribute that kind of material. And you should be okay with us taking those things down, yes? So then you would be for censorship to a degree. That's the whole point. The argument is not censorship versus not. The argument is, how much do we censor? And I haven't brought up all of the arguments from the quote-unquote anti-censorship side, but any future arguments that are of their points can actually be taken down by using that kind of framework, by not framing it as black and white, but rather a big shade of gray. Here's another argument that they make. One of the big questions, who decides what's okay speech? Do we really want all-powerful monopolies owned by Silicon Valley liberals to be the ones who are making these decisions? Not necessarily, but again, this argument sort of is a straw man and a misframing, because most of the people who make the argument that social media companies should better control things on their social media platforms are usually also saying that these companies should not be monopolies, and are usually talking about specific actions, and will always be there when they talk about wrongful takedowns. That's the thing. There are rightful takedowns, and there are wrongful takedowns, and their black and white view does not help any situation. For example, Pogs for Bernie, Andrea, previously stated, she's had certain, I don't know if she got taken down, or was it just, her account, not her account, but her things got, videos got taken down or something like that. But basically, people like Mike Figurino and, a bunch of other people were saying, yeah, this is screwed up. Or, there was some other guys who got taken down. I think it was the Surfs. They were yeah, this is fucked up, dude. Wow, why would this happen? But then people like the Fiorellas were I thought you were for censorship. It's that's not helping your case. That's not helping. If you're saying censorship is okay for thee and not for me, then you're not helping any situation. Your stupid black and white view about oh, it was okay to take Trump off of Twitter, but not this person, is completely stupid. An argument that can be made for this is similar to copyright. You would ban someone for posting a full movie on YouTube, without anything, but a person who makes a review of the movie and uses some clips from it, you wouldn't want them censored. You wouldn't want them taken down. And that's kind of why I know all of the situations and stuff to begin with, because I've known creators for a long time who've sort of had this sort of field look. I've been active on like YouTube and stuff for a long time. When I say active, I mean either as a watcher or a maker. And I know how these situations go. I know that there are certain people who will get taken down for wrongful reasons, and certain people who should be taken down for rightful reasons. Now, another argument that is touched upon is sort of the idea that this will be problematic for leftists down the line. The common thing is the left is the real target, because historically a lot more government censorship has been targeted to left-wingers and not right-wingers. Like, for example, there wasn't a, like, COINTELPRO, look at all the people who COINTELPRO infiltrated to try and suppress. Not a lot of right-wing groups. And it was like, literally just like the KKK. That was it, pretty much. And the rest of them were left-wing groups that they felt were subversive. Or like the Sedition Act. It particularly, like, criminalized a leftist view. Criticizing the war. That was a leftist view at the time. I mean, it's a leftist view, period. But, like, it was a leftist view, and they targeted it and tried to suppress it. Leftist groups have historically been the ones who are suppressed, because usually they're not the suppressors. Even when they are the suppressors, they still end up being the suppressed. However, like I said previously, the black and white view doesn't help them, because again, when you're censorship or not, you're not really going to get into the nuances. You don't want to be part of the conversation. And that's the thing, like I said before, the actual conversation is, how much do we censor? Not if we censor or not, things are going to be censored. The question is, what do we censor? What is the things that we will remove? And people who want to be productive will actually explain the things they want to be censored. Like, let's rattle off some general ideas. We would say CP should be censored, obviously. Let's get rid of those. Let's see. People who, like, post videos of, like, death and gore. Or at the very least, we would want to have, like, a warning before those kinds of materials can be posted. And even then, we can't, like, have it be like, oh, a person gets their head blown off, like, right on screen. Like, maybe something like a body cam footage of a particular shooting. But, like, again, depending on the severity of what is being posted. Twitter accounts that are literally being used to spread things like terrorism, those should be banned as well. Other sort of, like, you know, individuals that do certain things that shouldn't be looked up upon, like people who like having sex with animals, that's definitely something we should get rid of. Not furries, but, you know, there are some people who do legitimately want to do that, like Mr. Hands and stuff. People who, of course, use their Twitter account to, like, condemn, like, actual violence, targeted harassment. And one thing about that targeted harassment thing is that you have to be weary of what it is. Like, for example, maybe someone who has, like, a higher Twitter following. Like, you gotta be weary of certain things. Like, for example, if I did a quote tweet talking about, like, Kamala Harris and saying stuff bad about her, that wouldn't be considered targeted harassment, because I have no power over Kamala Harris. However, people who are on my same level or lower than me, probably that would be considered targeted harassment if I did it in a certain way. Those should have, like, issues. And you gotta have a system where certain threats are not considered as bad as certain other threats. Now, okay, that's a lot of things that I've said, and I don't even know if all those are 100%, like, foolproof. But then again, I'm contributing to the conversation. I'm saying some things that I think we should talk about and look into. But again, the individuals who believe in the black and white view, they want to be contrarian. You don't, like, they want to be against whatever is the mainstream, so they don't want to actually talk about, like, what would substantively be in this stuff. Like, for example, back to the previous point, the left is the real target. Well, maybe if leftists made it known, like, what kind of stuff they would accept if it were a thing, then maybe leftists wouldn't be the target. For example, like, how can leftists make their voices heard on an issue when their only point of contention is, no, I will not do this? Now, I know you might be saying, like, certain other issues, that's different, but, like, on this particular issue, saying you're just against all forms of censorship is dumb because you're effectively saying you don't know what you're talking about. Just saying, oh, I'm against all forms of censorship is basically you saying, yeah, there's absolutely nothing I can see that can ever be said that'll make me believe that they should be banned from Twitter. Now, again, that does not mean that I'm in favor of banning people for certain things. Like if they say a political view that necessarily people don't agree with, no. Like if they're a communist, don't ban them from Twitter. I wouldn't even necessarily say ban a Nazi from Twitter. Of course, depending on certain things, like David Duke. I mean, I don't know exactly what he's used his Twitter account for aside from like spreading his message and spreading his propaganda. So maybe get rid of him, but some random edgy 16-year-old who puts swastikas in his profile picture just for being an edgy kid, him, no. Or, I mean, again, depending on certain things, if he's like sending like the N-word to like people and like telling people go harass this guy, then yeah, get rid of him. But again, like I'm not saying all political views should be censored, but I'm saying there are some things that should be censored, obviously. And it is better to have a nuanced conversation about the specific things without needing to throw things at each other, basically say like, oh, you're for censorship completely, because it's like, literally someone told me that I'm in favor of Patriot Act 2.0, and it's really just like, how can you honestly believe that I think that? Unless you are a complete, literal moron, I would honestly say not very eclectic of you. So yeah, that's pretty much my 2 cents on the whole censorship argument. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Hopefully, and I say hopefully very obviously thinking like this isn't gonna happen, but hopefully at least some people will look at this video and go, okay, maybe we should have a bit more of a nuanced conversation on this. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when the future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or check my articles on the Independent Political Report.